A lot of samples with me, but it depends on your existing knowledge about RxJS, which code samples I'm going to show you and what demos I'm going to do. So let me quickly ask you for a show of hands. Who has never worked with RxJS before? Oh, quite a few. Who has never heard of RxJS before? Okay, that's good. So you know what RxJS is. Those of you who have never worked with it, why is it important, and why did I think that it would be a good idea to get here in front of you and tell you for half an hour or so what's new in RxJS? If you haven't worked with it, you might ask yourself, well, I'm not interested in what's new. Why should I care at all? Well, RxJS is quite an old framework. Well, let's put it that way. Rx is quite an old framework. I have come in touch first with reactive extensions with Rx many years ago, when it was originally invented in the Microsoft space. It was originally a C# project, and well, then they translated it into multiple languages. And the good thing with Rx is, if you know Rx in one language, you can take this knowledge and you can apply it to a lot of other languages, because essentially it works everywhere nearly the same. And today we are going to speak about the JavaScript flavor of reactive extensions. What is reactive extensions all about? Essentially, it's the observable pattern. You have an observable, an object that you can observe, that will stream some values, and you can create an observer, which could be, for instance, a function, and this observer is called for every item that the observable pushes out into the world. Well, that alone is not that interesting, because the observable pattern wouldn't be worth such a large framework. But the power of reactive extensions is that you get Rx, reactive extensions and observables, with dozens and dozens of very interesting operators. So maybe you are familiar with, for instance, other languages like C#, and you maybe have also worked with LINQ and such query languages which are embedded in the language. If you are, it happens that my origins are in the C# world, then you will feel a little bit familiar in the reactive extensions world, in the RxJS world, because the operators feel a little bit like a query language, but not a pull language where you have an enumerable that you can walk through, but it is a push world where the observable pushes elements to the subscribers, and the subscribers can then build a pipeline of operators doing things like filtering, mapping, switching, and a lot of other things, and then they can process it in any other way. The second thing why RxJS is really important for my work is because RxJS is now at home primarily in the Angular team. The primary developer of RxJS is part of the core Angular team. He's sitting together in one room with the core Angular team. That does not mean that RxJS equals Angular. You can use RxJS without Angular at all, and Google is committed to keep RxJS a separate project. It will not become a part of Angular, and nobody forces you to move to Angular if you want to benefit from the RxJS world. So today I'm going to show you mainly samples with Node.js and well, just JavaScript inside the browser. Maybe if we have time, I'm not sure, we will also take a quick look at an Angular sample, but primarily I'm going to show you just JavaScript code. Okay, so I would like to focus my talk, as promised, on the new stuff. What has changed from reactive extensions RxJS 5 to RxJS 6, because it happens that some breaking changes took place, and I would like to show you what these breaking changes were, why they were introduced in RxJS, and I'm going to show you ways of migrating your code from RxJS 5 to RxJS 6. If you have never worked with RxJS and you see strange things where you want to know more about, that looks crazy, please ask me, okay? Make this an interactive session so I can answer your questions immediately. First one. By the way, you will see that on the video. I have created a bit.ly link here for you. RX6 News is the shortcut link. If you go to that, you come to a GitHub repo and you will see all the slides, no, not slides, all the markdown files and code samples that I'm going to show you in the next few minutes. So no need to write anything down. You have that already on GitHub. So, the first thing I would like to talk about a little bit is this area of pipes. What do pipes mean? Let me quickly jump directly into the demo and show you some very simple TypeScript examples. Now here we are, very simple TypeScript examples written in Node.js. This is a very simple Node.js program, and what you see up here is a basic observable created by hand. You see, I'm creating an observable. The observable gets a callback function that gets a parameter, the observer, and then the observable can push values with the next method and the error method and the complete method. It can push errors and events to the observer, and the observer can then subscribe, for instance. Okay? In the good old world of RxJS 5.4 and before, the typical programming model looked like this. For instance, here, or you see it here, you had an observable, you created it with the creation function. This was typically a member function from the observable class, and then you apply operators like filtering, mapping, and dozens of other operators. So you had this ... chain of operators, and at the end, you take, for instance, subscribe or for each to process, to subscribe to the results. This was the typical programming pattern as we had it, or as we have it, until version 5.4. Yes, you have here the creator function timer, which issues a new element, which pushes a new element into the pipeline every second, for instance. So this implements a simple countdown from 5 to 0, because every second we send in a message. This message is then mapped by calculating 5 minus the current number. Then we say take 6, so we only take the first 6 elements. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and at the end we print the result. Very, very simple. Let me quickly show you this last example here. Okay. Let's build it. And let's run it. Very simple. And it's running 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's it. So this is the good old world of programming with RxJS 5.4, and I'm quite sure that at least some of you are familiar with this way of programming. And this has fundamentally changed in RxJS 6. Well, to be perfectly honest, it has changed in RxJS 5.5. In 5.5, the whole writing of these chains of operators changed, and if we take a look at the new way of writing it, let's jump directly to the last example here. It looks like this. The methods are no longer member methods. The filter methods are no longer member methods of the observable class, but they are separately imported top-level functions. So an operator is now a function that you have to import, and you pass this function, or let's say a number of functions, to a very special operator, to the one and only operator, pipe. So you're building pipelines, and you do no longer write this lengthy concatenation of methods. Why has that been done? Well, let's quickly go back to the 5.4 version, and let me quickly copy that path, fire up an Explorer, go here and open this separately in Visual Studio Code as a separate project, and let's go here in app.ts, and then let's do something like this. Yes, I will set a breakpoint here and start the debugger. It's just a Node.js debugger. This is the old version, where we had the list of methods, and I should have removed this comment. Otherwise, we will never hit this breakpoint. So let's run it again. So I'm sorry, I forgot to remove the comment here. So now we are hopefully ready. Yes, here we are. The point that I wanted to show you is if we hover over the observable class and we take a look in the prototype, then you will see that we have all the different methods like do and filter and map. These are the operators. They are part of the observable class. How is that done? If we take a look at the import statements here, we import the observable class and then something a little bit ugly happens. We add a bunch of import statements and these import statements are patching the observable class. So at runtime, we are adding functionality, exactly the functionality that we need to the observable class. This has been state of the art in RxJS 5.4. And this has a lot of drawbacks. This is global for everybody who uses the observable class. So you can maybe replace filter methods that somebody else has patched into this class, or you have this import in one part of your application and the other part is simply relying on the fact that this is here. And if in the other part you remove the import statement, suddenly the method is no longer there and you have no idea what's going on. This is the reason why the RxJS team decided to change that. And if we take a look how the imports now look like, they look like that. We import the observable and then we import all the different operators as separate functions. So we do no longer patch the observable class. If I would add the same breakpoint again, we would only see the one and only pipe method, and the pipe method gets the list of operators which are just functions. So this is a great step, a step into the right direction. This has been done in RxJS 5.5, and RxJS 6 has gone the next step. Because if you take a look at the different imports here, it's really not easy to remember all this stuff. There are so many options. You can import all the different operators from this RxJS/operators, or you can import it in this way. If you want to import a creation function, you have to import it in that way. So a lot of different things, and to be honest, I always had to look up the Stack Overflow posts to remember how this stuff has to be done. And now let me show you how that looks like in RxJS 6. If we take a look in RxJS 6, then you have to remember exactly 2, or to be more specific, 5 different places from which you import your stuff. If you want to have a creation function, you simply import it from RxJS. If you want an operator, you import it from RxJS operators. That's it. Nothing else. There are 3 other sources which you can look up in the documentation. You can use them if you want to work with AJAX calls and things like that. I will not go into the details here. But the point is, in RxJS, this has been made drastically simpler. And that's a very important thing. With that, some renaming had to go along, because if you take a look at the 5.4 version and we take a look at the different operators, you see you had operators like do, and there are other operators like, for instance, throw and things like that. And these things don't really work out nicely if you name a function as a JavaScript keyword. That doesn't play very well, and therefore we have some breaking changes from RxJS 5.4 to RxJS 5.5 and RxJS 6. If you take a look at the RxJS 6 version, you will see that the do method is no longer called do, it's now called tap. So if you have existing code in 5.4 and you want to translate it into 6.0, you will have to deal with some breaking changes, especially renamings and refactorings. Okay, so what is the takeaway until here? We have the pipes, this is this stuff, and we have a brand new version of how to do the importing. You might now ask yourself, how should I cope with that? I mean, I have a huge code base, maybe from Angular, from a previous version of Angular, and I have to fix that by hand. Well, the good news is you don't have to, because there is really a very nice library which is called RxJS Compat. What you can do with RxJS Compat, well, I have to show it. Let me quickly open that in Visual Studio Code again. Here it is. If we uninstall RxJS, let's take a look at package.json. You will see this is now the 5.4 version. So let's do an uninstall, npm uninstall RxJS. And if we install it again, we'll get the newest version. Just to make it step by step. And it will break. Of course it will break. Here we are. If we try to compile this guy, yeah, we get a lot of errors because, of course, the whole exports, imports, and so on, they simply do not and no longer work. But what we can now do is we can now install RxJS Compat. It's a compatibility library that you add to your 5.4 RxJS code. And if you do that, magic happens. I always call this Harry Potter programming. A little fairy dust over the code and it suddenly works. npm run build. And the fairies do their magic. It works. I could run it. It really works. So the RxJS Compat library brings in some additional code which allows you to keep your code as it is. Of course, this is not the ultimate goal. You should migrate your code to the new pipe system, to the new import system, but maybe you do not have time currently, but you maybe want to move to the new version of Angular and things like that. You are forced to go to RxJS 6. And with that library, you can make your life a little bit easier by postponing the difficult thing of renaming all this stuff. But I have something even better for you. The second thing that I would like to show you is a linter rule that the RxJS team has implemented. This linter rule is in the RxJS TS-lint npm package, and you can install it globally. You have the link in my slides or in my markdown files that I will give you. And what you can essentially run, you can run this one. My keyboard is acting very strangely here. So, whatever. So, let's open that here in the 5.4 version. And let's open the app.ts here and do clearing and then run this tool, RxJS 5 to 6 migrate. Wouldn't it be nice if we do not only have this Compat library, but if we would have a tool, in that case a linter tool, that goes through the entire RxJS code based on your TypeScript project information. It analyzes tsconfig.json and it therefore finds all your source codes. It analyzes all the source code files and it should rewrite our entire code so it magically becomes RxJS 6 compatible. Let's see if that works. Let's run it. Be patient. We are asked to be patient. And if everything works out nicely, you see live up there, the rules that are active here. Of course, the code isn't very beautiful, so we have to format the code later on. But you see, the imports were changed automatically. If I go down, the old version of the concatenated RxJS 5.4 operators were turned into a pipeline. The filter is now no longer a method of the observer class. It is now a top-level method, exactly what we need for RxJS 6. So now that we have run this method here, we can take a look in package.js and maybe remember that we have this RxJS Compat thing here. Let's remove it, okay? So let's go and say npm uninstall RxJS Compat. Let's do that. And now, if the demo gods are smiling, yes, it compiles. Exactly that is what I wanted to show you. We started from an RxJS 5.4 version. We migrated this to RxJS 6 by adding the compatibility layer. Later on, we ran the TypeScript linter rules from the RxJS team that rewrote our entire RxJS code, and then we could remove the compat shim, and now we are natively on RxJS 6. Will it work with all your code magically everywhere? Well, we all know how programming works. Probably not. But it is a good thing. Google has publicly announced that they have used this tool for tens of thousands of source files in their own source repositories, and they have tuned it for that. It works very nicely. It is an 80% solution, and maybe you have to do some little tweaks after you ran this tool, but it is better to have an 80% tool than to have nothing and to have to work through all the source code on your own. So this was the rewriting of the entire code. The next thing that I would like to show you is another breaking change which has happened in RxJS 6 compared to RxJS 5.5. And I have added this sample here in the 5.5 version. I will scroll down a little bit, and I would like you to pay close attention to, where is it? This one. This line 53 to 57. Let's take a look what's happening here. I'm using the concat method. By the way, concat is also now a separate method. It is no longer a member of the observable class which you have to patch in. No, it's a separate method now. And what I'm doing here is I'm creating an observable based on the number 1. So of1 will give me an observable of number which just has a single element. And then I'm concatenating it with an observable that contains no valid payload but just an error. So the result will be an observable of number which will deliver 1 error. Okay? But the point is, if you take a look at this code at the beginning, there is no asynchronous code here. We do not do an HTTP request, or we do not access a database, so no asynchronous work. If there would be asynchronous work, this would not be valid. But in RxJS 5.4 and 5.5, it would be perfectly valid to use a try-catch handler to catch synchronous errors like this. So if I would run this guy, it would just say 1, because we have the console.log here, and the next line that we would see on the console is something went wrong. So the try-catch error works in cases where you work with RxJS without asynchronous stuff. Again, if you have asynchronous stuff in your pipeline, this doesn't work, even in RxJS 5.4. In RxJS 6, this code will break. In RxJS 6, the throwing of the exception, even in the synchronous world, is done by scheduling it using setTimeout. So it is no longer caught by the try-catch exception here. If I take a look at the same code here, if I would run this guy here, bad things would happen. The try-catch would not be run. It would the exception would be well, I can run it. It's there. Let me quickly remove that guy here, and let me see if we have. Yep, that looks good. We still have a few more minutes. Say cd something like this. npm run build. And npm start. Oh, I put the build step in the start, so I could have started it immediately, and it should, yeah, not very beautiful exception. This is exactly what I wanted to show you. Here you see how the RxJS team is now using setTimeout with a throw error, so synchronous error handling like that would not work anymore. Now we have to do something else. We have in the subscribe method, we have to supply, for instance, an error callback. So what we essentially can do is we can take this code here, move it up here and say exception and copy the code up here. We can remove the try catch, something like this. And if we now fix that one and run the start again, we should see Exception handling as we want it, the ugly exception has been removed. We see one and something has gone wrong. This is another breaking change. Maybe in your code, if you have things like that, and if you relied on this way of error handling, this will break your code and you have to fix it. You have to now specify a catch handler or a catch callback function, as I've shown you here. So, let me take a look at my README file. Yeah, that's it. And we have 27 minutes, I think, on the clock, so I'm nearly done. If you want to know more, if you want to know all the details, there are some additional details which are not that mainstream and not that important, but if you want to know the whole story, I encourage you to take a look at this video. It's only 25 minutes. It's by the main developer of RxJS, Ben Lesh. It's quite new. It's from the release candidate world, but it is applicable to what you currently have in RxJS, and you will see all the details there. Additionally, I have added some recommendable blog posts here in that area and the upgrade guide. If you have RxJS 5.x currently in your projects, there is a guide in the RxJS documentation that contains all the details about the things that I've shown you here, because in 30 minutes I can only scratch the surface. However, I hope these 30 minutes were interesting and you have an idea how pipes will make your life easier. We do no longer patch the observable class, error handling has changed, and generally getting started with RxJS has drastically been simplified by changing the importing of the whole RxJS stuff and by cleaning up a lot of names and functions, because the RxJS guys are of course very interested in reaching as many developers as possible, and therefore cleaning up, making things simpler is always a good idea. With that, I would like to open it up for questions, because based on my watch I have 3 minutes left for questions. Thank you very much.